thanks again, Trace, for being here. Grief in a pandemic. As I've said to folks before who've joined us, you don't have to be an expert, but you hopefully will help guide us in the conversation. But I do think you bring lots of expertise and connections. When I was re-looking, Trace and I, and I'll full disclosure, we're in a lectionary group together, and have known each other for a while. I think from the time when you were at Hastings College is when we met, um, running a wonderful program there in servant leadership, and a grant there, and it touched so many different people I know. Um, but he just brings so many gifts and experiences I think will be helpful here. Let me introduce him to you, but just say hello to us, Trace, and tell us where you're calling in from today.
Hey, Lee, thanks for the opportunity to be with y'all. I am in Decatur, Georgia at my home, sheltering in place in this very confusing time in which we live. And like many office staffs, we are learning the ways to navigate these virtual environments and keep each other engaged and
Right.
to be serving. We've got about 2,000 members spread across the country and doing our best to make sure that they're able to be in both the hot spots and the spots that are not yet.
Right.
It's been a fascinating time.
Well, we want to hear more about that. And I know you got stories to tell. I've been reading about some of those, but just to introduce you to my friends, one of the things that gives me the greatest joy I have learned is having people that I know introduced to other people that may not know each other. So hopefully you'll make some new friends out of this. You've already got plenty, but I think it brings the body of Christ a little more closer in connection. And I think it's hopeful because Presbyterians out there doing some great stuff. I mean, lots of people, but I'm particularly love when Presbyterian ministers are using their MDivs and other degrees in ways that are gifts to the church that not everybody knows about. So Trace is currently, and has been since 2013, the executive director of the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education, and works closely in the chaplaincy innovation lab that I think he's going to talk to us about with colleagues Wendy Cage and Michael Skaggs. Um, he has previously served as executive director of the Fraser Center in Atlanta, the president of the Fund for Theological Education, now the Forum for Theological Exploration. He was a program director and a professor at Hastings College in Little Hastings, Nebraska. Y'all go to Omaha and then go a little north and you'll find Hastings. And has his PhD from Syracuse in cultural foundations of education, a Master of Divinity from Princeton Seminary. I think that's where you met your now wife, Mary Stoops, who is a pastor at North Decatur Presbyterian. He's a graduate. He's a kangaroo graduate of Austin College, one of my favorite mascots ever, the Kangaroos. And it fits Trace. He's smiling. I'm glad to see him. He is also, in addition to being a partner in life with Mary, they are parents of Jacob, a recent Davidson graduate, I think, and another recent graduate of, I don't know the high school, Martha is graduating from
Decatur High.
Decatur High. Go Bulldogs. He loves, I love this, he loves to read. I know he reads a lot. He loves to bike. He loves to homebrew. He loves to dance. Maybe we'll get some dance moves today. He loves to sing, but he says he doesn't like to do all those at the very same time. I bet you could do 2 or 3 of those. It could be a challenge, COVID, this is what it gives us the opportunity.
There you go.
I didn't know this, but I learned in preparing that I did 1 unit of CPE, which I always said, I wish I did a second. You did 8 units.
Yeah.
That's a little crazy good. I mean, it's awesome. He has also had a full scholarship at the Harvard Business School in Strategic Perspectives on Nonprofit Management. I mean, y'all, Stanford Center for Social Innovation. If you heard of IDEO, he can probably, that's kind of where that has been happening. He's been a pastor also in Nashville and in Melbourne, Australia. gives so much. I love that you're also very involved with LARC, which if people don't know about LARC, you might tell them a little bit about that. Just an amazing international movement. He is active at Central Presbyterian Church. I think you might sing in the choir. Is that right? Yep.
I do. Yep.
And so it just brings so much to this. One of his students reminded me, and I think this fits today, is that one of your benedictions that you close conversations with often is a liturgical one that you have adapted a little bit. You know what this is? Go in peace, but
Not in
not in
pieces.
pieces. Right? And so I think that's what we're trying to do today, is trying to think about grief and have peace, have shalom, wholeness, but not in too many pieces if possible. So I'm going to look forward to that conversation. If folks have questions or comments, please feed them into the chat on Facebook Live, and we'll try to get to as many of those as possible. But first, before we dive into that, I just love to hear about your call about. I love how Howard Thurman talks about it's not what the world needs, but it's what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is people who are coming alive. And I'm wondering, over the long haul and maybe in these days, what is helping you come alive?
Thanks, Lee. Most folks that know me probably know me first and foremost as more on the irreverent side than the reverend side, and a bit of a goofball. I paid my way through college and seminary tending bar and waiting tables most of the time, which is where I learned a lot of my pastoral care skills. But the thing that brought me into ministry was actually when I was 13, I had a friend who died of leukemia. He wasn't supposed to live past 2.
Oh,
And
wow.
the last time I saw him, he was actually out on a basketball court. He had a particular leukemia manifest mainly in the bones in his legs, and wore braces throughout his life, but was still able to get out and play with friends. And saw him on that court, and 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from a friend letting me know that he died. And
Wow.
at that age, I started asking the kinds of questions that a 13-year-old's going to ask about life and death anyway. And I was really dissatisfied with the answers that I got. In fact, I started to get a little angry about some of the pithy things that seemed to be the kinds of responses that people gave to make themselves feel better and me feel no different. That drove me to, when I got to Austin College, I took a death and dying course and really just fell in love with the content, which led me to volunteer at Children's Medical Center back in Dallas and do a pediatric hospice program. So before I ever got to seminary, I was already just
Mm-hmm.
really deeply committed to these questions and these themes. And some of it came out of the place where I felt like people were most alive seemed to be on some of those oncology floors. These kids that were
Wow.
at that liminal space between life and death. There are few things more honest than a sick kid.
Mm.
I mean, they just put it out there, and I realized how hungry I was for that kind of integrity and clarity. The way that we didn't have to have any of the preambling that we often do with each other. It just got real fast.
Right. Right.
So I fell in love with the context, and it led me into a couple of years of CPE, as you noted, also into campus ministry and college chaplaincy. Because of the kinds of life questions and that Sharon Park sense of big questions and worthy dreams,
Mhm. One of my
being with
favorite books ever.
being with young adults at those shipwreck moments, when they're trying to figure out who they are and what they believe, it just became a really powerful experience along the way too. So I have not had what looks like a straight line path in terms of a career in ministry by any means, but um, there is this steady pulse of staying in this place of death and dying, grief and loss. There was a great article recently in one of the folks that have been following the pandemic and following the work of chaplains. They describe chaplains as the ones who run toward death,
Mm.
which is so counterintuitive to the human way, but I read that and recognized my own life within it. There's a part of me that's
Wow.
certainly a sense of my call.
You know, you saying that, you have a willingness to step into those difficult places. I know, and take on challenges maybe you didn't see coming around the corner, even with the places where has paid you in your call. I mean, I didn't mention that you're also on the operations. Is that still true? The operations
I
committee?
was. Now I'm on CPM, so they're even more
Oh,
frightening.
good. Okay. I'm glad you're on CPM, but you were on the operations with the Presbyterian Greater Atlanta. You don't mind taking on big projects. I really do appreciate that, to kind of run toward and address, the issues. And I think, and other people say this about you, and hopefully folks who are listening who don't know you will quickly learn, is there is a vulnerability about you and an open bookness about you that is really refreshing. You don't see that always in executive leaders, for sure, and it's refreshing, and I think it's a good model. So much so. So you were
Well,
just telling me leading up to the call that y'all have actually, I'm not sure if it's the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, there's going to be some resources we can link to. Could you tell us about what y'all been working on?
yeah, we've been trying to do weekly webinars for chaplains just to get the kind of resources they need in the moment. So a wide variety of tools available, and it's beyond healthcare. We've been working with federal and state level prison chaplains because of what's going on within the
Oh,
prison
wow.
systems right now. We've been working with military chaplains because of what's been happening both in the Navy on the boats, as well
Wow.
as within the Army bases. Higher ed chaplains, who many of them are trying to help students figure out, what does this mean for my life? And it's been fascinating. This has been similar working with the Committee on Preparation for Ministry too. One of the tendencies that people have had in this crisis has been trying to live their life as if they're going to get it back on a track. And
Right.
part of the grief process in all of this is coming to terms with the fact that there is no track now.
I have to laugh or I'll cry. I mean,
Right? Well, I mean, that's just it. The track doesn't exist, and it will not exist in the way that it did afterwards. So to be with a group that defines itself in innovation, I mean, this is a time of innovating, and even innovating how we grieve in the midst of all of it. There's a Mary Oliver poem, her In Blackwater Woods, which is short, that I have loved for a long time, and I've found the meaning has shifted significantly because of where we are. It's one of the poems that we have as a resource on the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab website. It's just chaplaincyinnovation.org, easy to find. The poem is, to live in this world, you must be able to do three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it, and when the time comes to let it go, to let it go. And much of the work of
beautiful.
good pastoral care, spiritual care, has been in that notion of helping people know how to hold it against your bones, knowing your own life depends on it. What does it mean to hold it against your bones when you can't touch it? What
Yeah.
does it mean to
Right.
hold it against your bones when the closest you can get is through a digital device?
Right.
Yeah. So that notion of holding on to it feels fundamentally different than what it was 3 months ago. And it's going to stay that way for a long time. I mean, that's part of what I think is also the rush to try to get back to open up society, open up communities, open up business. I hear the desire in all of that. But even as that opens, it's not going to open in the way that it was open before.
Right.
Um,
Well, actually, one of our colleagues, Beth Neal, is touching on that
mhm,
right now. She's asking, um, you know, this is a time to start thinking about later as we look back
mhm.
on not just the grief that comes with death, but what we lost, that sports season, that graduation. I mean, there's going to be grief work that's going to happen into the future. I think that's what she's sort of pointing to. We can't go back to what it was. So I
Yeah.
hear you hinting at that. This is a time to start innovating and thinking about, that future
Yeah.
ministry setting.
Yeah. It's things like if you're a pastor of a local congregation, part of what the grief work is right now is all the things that used to be the way they used to be. Because it's likely that we'll have social distancing within congregational settings for a while. But it's also likely that people have gotten used to some of these digital formats, and you're going to be running hybrid services for the rest of your life. That this is just going to be the new normal. I don't know for sure, but that is a strong likelihood. So
Possibility. Right.
what are the things you need to let go of within yourself to be able
Mm-hmm.
to embrace what might come in this new shape and new form, which, in so many ways is the story of crucifixion and resurrection over and over again. Um,
Sure.
the way of life that the way we thought it was going to be, has radically shifted into this new thing. And we live into the now what all the time. So what
I
does it
don't know
mean
if
to live
it's
in?
I don't know if it's because it's Eastertide, but a couple of guests keep pointing back to that. And Jeffrey Bullock even said something like, "This is what we do as a church. We know about death and resurrection. I mean, this is how we do it." I mean, I think that's really helpful. You mentioned, I'm not sure if it was on the call or in our lead up, Kubler-Ross, and everybody sort of goes to her in terms of kind of stages of grief. But you're also saying it's not that kind of straight line anymore. Is that what you're saying? I mean, we got to
Yeah, yeah.
rethink the stages.
Yeah, if you're going to look at stages, look at David Kessler's work now that builds on Kubler-Ross. He was an associate of Kubler-Ross later in life, and he actually talks about a sixth stage as well. And he actually talks about these as things that we move in and out of. So it is
Mm,
possible to have overlapping stages simply because of the nature of the questions and the changes we have. And
hmm
there are different layers of grief as well, but that doesn't mean that any one of them is any less intense. So
hmm
the grief of the loss of another human being is the one that we're most often talking about when we're looking at those stages. But there's also the grief of the loss of a way of life.
hmm
There's a grief of a loss of expectations. Um, there's, one of the most difficult things to grieve is plans or hopes because it's
Right.
intangible, right? You thought was going to be a particular way and it's not going to be.
Right.
And I've got a daughter who wants to head to college in the fall. What's that going to be? What's that going to be like?
All those, my wife teaches, I think and every college is talking about this and what is the classroom going to look like and what have you. I just want to let you know that a couple fans are out there. Kate is Klausy Estes. Is that
Oh, yeah,
right?
yep. Kate, she's
Uh,
currently the interim associate at our church.
and I know Nolan Huizinga was there, and some others saying hello and appreciating
Hi, y'all.
um, your ministry. Um, so Kessler, Kessler, is that right?
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
We
in the
will
sixth
see.
stage that he's added, the sixth stage is almost like written for Presbyterians, I feel. It's meaning. It's about meaning
Meaning.
making. In that notion of one of the things that people often do when they first respond is they try to make meaning of the experience for the person who's grieving. And please don't do that. Stop. No. Um, but as you begin, we dip our toe into meaning to see if it makes sense. And it may make sense until we hit the next challenge, and then we'll back up from that a little bit. And that
Hmm
meaning making process evolves over time to a place to where we may still feel deep pain and sadness because of certain losses, but we have a narrative that we construct around it that's the meaning making process. And in
hmm
some ways, to put it in parallel to what we were talking about with Eastertide, it's the narrative that the church developed around Jesus' death and
hmm
resurrection that becomes that meaning making process for us. It's a profound meaning making process in that regard, but we do it with
Right.
everything from the loss of a pet to, moving to a new home.
Right. Right. I've been hearing and talking to some friends who are in pastoral transition, moving from one church to another. I mean, how do you say goodbye in this and say hello and say hello? I mean, I think something that's helpful, and I will point people back to that you said a minute ago, I think don't lose it, is that we move in and out of these stages. It's not a straight line.
Right.
And that, and they're layered, and they're all, I mean, anger is there, right? Denial is there. I mean, but I think about my own process around things. Definitely, I see that happening, and that's from a pastoral perspective. It's helpful to be able to notice that and note that in preaching about and pastoral prayers. I mean, all these things can be acknowledged where you actually voice in the prayer, being angry or being in denial, what have you.
Well, and we carry it in our bodies. I mean, the amount of embodied expression of all of this is really important as well. So paying attention to one of the simple meditation tools that I think is really important for people that are in grief is a body scan, where you listen for, I mean, imagine sort of a circle of light going down through your body and just assessing what you feel and not spending any time trying to analyze it. Just note it. Where do you feel certain things? And how are you holding those emotions of those stages in that space? I mean, if you've got a deep discomfort in your gut, what's going on there? Pay attention to that. But the other part that those who are really gifted, John Kabat-Zinn and some others who are teaching meditation practice in some beautiful ways, rather than just trying to figure out what's going on in that gut, also thank your gut for carrying it.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I mean, to offer some gratitude that these things are being held and that you're still going, right?
Right.
There's a
I've been seeing a lot of yoga, and a lot of yoga practice does this sorts of thing. I mean, and that's something folks can do for, so that's helpful. Yeah. Who was the person you just
really
mentioned?
John Kabat-Zinn.
Okay.
KABOT-ZINN.
Okay. That's great. Let me see if there's something else here. I don't know if there's things that you want to make sure you think would be helpful. I know we're winding down. We just have a few more minutes here. Any other places you want to point people to, or?
Well, on the Labs COVID site, the Chaplaincy Innovation Labs COVID site, we've recently put together a brief piece that is an edited piece around grief and loss. And rather than it being about the stages, it's actually, each section is divided by an expression you might hear a person make. I'm so full of rage, I can't go on. This doesn't make any sense to me. I don't feel anything at all. And those phrases would be at the top of the page, and then a list of resources would be beneath it. And it's poetry and it's audio. So we've got links to Krista Tippett interviews. We've got video pieces. Some TED Talks are connected there. There's some great books that are connected, both theological texts as well as psychological, sociological texts. The idea is to give a range of things that really fit. There's a really lovely collection as well of children's stories that are all ways of using the stories to talk with children about grief and loss. So
I'm seeing one of our viewers is one of our co-moderators who was on a couple of weeks ago, Bill Marie Citron Oblieri, and she's been reading children's books on Friday, Facebook Live from Westminster John Knox, and I think those have been a real gift. She's also thanking you for bringing up the physical aspects, the embodiment, that we have to work through. Marissa Galvan is also noting you can buy that Kessler book on Kindle, because we can't go to the library or the bookstore very easily. At least,
that's right.
Maybe in Georgia you can, but I don't advise you to. But it's available for a very low price on in ebook form. I won't mention the exact vendor she described, but you can imagine that. So, well, this has been great. Thanks for all you do. Folks, if y'all don't know Trace, get to know him and his ministry, and what a gift you are. And to the Presbytery, to Central Church, to Atlanta, to the PCUSA, and to the APCE world, and more broadly. I know you're working internationally. I'm guessing you're not too sad that you don't have to be traveling, because I know you like to be at home.
Yeah, I traveled about 140,000 miles last year, and I don't think I'm gonna hit that this year.
Yeah, it's okay. I think you'll keep your status on the airline that we won't mention, but I think you'll do just fine. But I'm just so grateful for you for this time and for your friendship, and blessings on you. I wonder if you would be willing to share a blessing or a charge or both with those who've gathered with us. That would be a real gift.
Yeah, my charge to folks is to hold each other in the light and with grace and gently. That if anything, this moment has taught us what a fragile people we are, and what a remarkable world we're in. So, in ways that you can savor nature, in ways that you can be grateful for these bodies that we have, in ways that you can find one another in a loving spirit that crosses all these boundaries and divides that just seem ridiculous in the face of a virus that doesn't care about any of those things. May we be to one another the kind of gracious, loving presence that the universe has always longed for, and that we're just far too good at mucking up.
May it be. Hallelujah. Amen.
Yeah, thank you. Amen.